March 22, 1967, 11:43 p.m., Wells Restaurant, 2049 7th Avenue. Bumpy Johnson stared at numbers that made no sense. His accountant had laid out 17 ledgers across the table. Every policy bank, every numbers runner, every protection payment in Harlem. The math was impossible. Bumpy's empire was earning $2 million annually. But a kid named Frank Lucas, his driver, his protégé, his nobody, had bank statements showing $8 million. In 18 months, Bumpy had ruled Harlem for 37 years. Built an empire through intelligence and patience. Frank had been his employee for 4 years. A student, a shadow. Now the shadow was outgrowing the man. The Italian Mafia controlled the heroin trade in New York. 5 families. Unlimited resources. They cleared $15 million yearly from drugs across all 5 boroughs. Frank Lucas, working alone, was already earning half that, from Harlem alone. In less than 2 years, Bumpy's coffee went cold in the cup. His hands didn't shake, but his mind raced. He'd made one mistake. One decision. He'd taught Frank everything except loyalty. Now Frank was building something Bumpy couldn't stop. The question wasn't if Frank would surpass everyone. The question was how fast, and what would be left of Harlem when he finished. 18 months earlier, in September 1965, Bumpy had given Frank Lucas a gift. Bumpy Johnson had been running Harlem since 1930. 62 years old in 1967, gray hair, deep lines around his eyes. But his mind stayed razor sharp. He'd survived Dutch Schultz, Lucky Luciano, federal prison, and Alcatraz. Most gangsters died young or broke. He controlled the numbers rackets, policy banks, and protection networks from 110th Street to 155th. The Italians ran drugs. Bumpy ran everything else. That separation kept peace, kept profits flowing, kept Harlem under black control. Bumpy read Shakespeare between strategy meetings, quoted Sun Tzu during negotiations. He believed in codes, in honor, in protecting Harlem even while profiting from it. But 1965 was different. The Vietnam War was escalating. Heroin flooded American streets. The Italian families, Genovese, Gambino, Lucchese, Colombo, Bonanno, imported from the French Connection. Turkish opium through Marseille. Their product reached Harlem at 3% purity, cut 7 times, stepped on, diluted. The dope killed slowly, made addicts sick but rarely dead, perfect for business. But Bumpy saw the devastation, watched kids OD in alleys, watched families destroyed. The Italians didn't care. They lived in Staten Island and New Jersey. Harlem was just a market. Frank Lucas had been watching too, learning Bumpy's methods. But Frank saw opportunity where Bumpy saw tragedy. If the Italians controlled heroin through the French Connection, what if someone bypassed them, went directly to the source? Cut out every middleman. Frank had an idea. Bumpy gave him permission to try. One chance, one experiment. That permission changed everything. Bumpy thought Frank would learn a lesson about respecting established power. Instead, Frank learned how to destroy it. The Italians had no idea what was coming. Neither did Bumpy. The enemy wasn't a person. It was a system. The Italian Mafia's heroin monopoly was built by Vito Genovese in the 1950s, perfected by Carmen, the cigar, Gallant. They controlled every step of the supply chain. Turkish farmers grew opium. French chemists converted it to heroin. Corsican smugglers transported it to Montreal. Italian truckers brought it to New York. Each step added cost. Each middleman took a cut. By the time heroin reached Harlem, it cost 50 zalozen per kilo and measured 3% pure. The Italians split $15 million annually across 5 families. No one challenged them, not the Irish, not the blacks, not anyone. The system had muscle behind it. Carlo Gambino commanded 300 made men. The Genovese family had 400. Between them, they controlled the docks, the unions, the politicians, and the police. Cross them, and you disappeared. Challenge them, and your family disappeared. They'd killed Dutch Schultz for less. They'd assassinated Albert Anastasia in a barber chair for disrespect. The Italians didn't negotiate. They executed. Their weakness was arrogance. They believed black gangsters were small time, street level, incapable of sophisticated operations. Bumpy Johnson earned respect because he stayed in his lane, didn't touch drugs, didn't threaten their money. Frank Lucas was just Bumpy's driver, invisible, irrelevant. The Italians never saw him coming. By March 1967, Frank's operation was stealing 400,000 monthly from Italian profits. They still didn't notice. They assumed addicts were using less. Demand was down, market fluctuations. By the time they realized someone was undercutting them, Frank would be untouchable. The system that protected them would collapse. And Bumpy, who'd maintained peace for decades, would be blamed for starting the war. Frank's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Go to the source. September 1965, Frank boarded Pan Am Flight 001 to Bangkok, Thailand. First class, carried $50,000 in cash, wore an Army Lieutenant Colonel's uniform he'd bought from a costume shop. The uniform was insurance. If anyone asked questions, he was military. To rotating home. Frank had learned from Bumpy blend in, stand out never. The flight took 19 hours with stops in Honolulu and Tokyo. Frank didn't sleep. Planned. Calculated. By the time he landed at Don Mueang Airport, he'd mapped his entire operation. Bangkok in 1965 smelled like diesel fuel, fish sauce, and opportunity. The city was chaos, American soldiers on R&R from Vietnam, bar girls, black market dealers. The Golden Triangle, where Burma, Laos, and Thailand met, produced 90% of the world's opium, but nobody exported directly to America. The French connection controlled distribution. Frank wanted to break that monopoly. He checked into the Dusit Thani Hotel. Room 847, 8th floor. View of the Chao Phraya River. The room cost $30 per night. Frank paid for a month. He had a contact, Leslie Ike Atkinson, former Army sergeant, ran a bar called Jack's American Star Bar on Phetchaburi Road. Ike knew everyone. More importantly, he knew how to move product. September 18, 1965, 20:14 p.m. Frank walked into Jack's American Star Bar. The place stank of beer, cigarettes, and sweat. 12 soldiers drinking, 4 bar girls working. Ike stood behind the bar, 6'2", 230 pounds, scar across his left cheek. He saw Frank. Nodded. They talked in the back room for 3 hours. Frank laid out his plan. Buy heroin directly from Burmese producers in the Golden Triangle. 98% pure. No French middlemen. No Corsican smugglers. Ship it to America hidden in furniture. Ike had connections with military cargo flights. Teak furniture was popular. Americans bought it constantly. Hollow out the legs. Fill with heroin. Seal it. Ship it. Frank would handle distribution in Harlem. They'd split 50-50. Ike asked one question. What about the Italians? Frank smiled. They'll never know until it's too late. The first shipment arrived in New York on November 3, 1965, 20 kilos. Frank paid $300 per kilo at source. Total cost $86,000 including shipping. He cut it down to 10% purity, still 3 times stronger than Italian product. Each kilo became 10 kilos of street, ready heroin, 200 kilos total, sold at 50,000 per kilo wholesale. Gross revenue $10 million. Net profit $9 million. From one shipment, Frank called it Blue Magic, branded it, stamped each package with a blue tape seal. Within 3 weeks, addicts were asking for it by name. Italian dealers couldn't compete. Their dope made you sick. Blue Magic made you fly. Word spread through shooting galleries and street corners. By December, Frank controlled 40% of Harlem's heroin market. At 11C, 11:47 p.m. on March 22, 1967, Bumpy finally understood what he'd unleashed. Frank sat across from him at Wells' restaurant, booth in the back. Dorothy, the waitress, had brought coffee. Bumpy's accountant had finished his presentation. The numbers were undeniable. Frank was earning more than Bumpy, more than any single Italian family, more than anyone in New York except the combined Mafia itself. And he'd done it in 18 months. Bumpy stirred his coffee. The spoon clinked against porcelain. The sound echoed. Frank watched him. No fear, no apology, pure confidence. "You taught me everything," Frank said. His voice was soft, respectful. "Cut out middleman. Control supply. Build loyalty. I listen." Bumpy set down his spoon. "I taught you how to survive, not how to start a war. Nobody's starting a war. The Italians will notice. Let them." At 11:52 p.m., Bumpy leaned forward. His eyes locked onto Frank's. "You're making more money than me." Than anyone. That kind of success attracts attention. Attention attracts violence. Frank leaned forward too. "I'm ready." The room fell silent. Dorothy stopped refilling sugar containers. 2 truck drivers at the counter froze mid-conversation. Even the kitchen noise died down to Bumpy and Frank. Teacher and student, past and future, staring at each other across a table covered with ledgers that proved everything had changed. Then Bumpy laughed. Not angry, not bitter, resigned. "You're going to be richer than all of them combined." Frank nodded.
"In 3 years."
What Frank didn't know was that Bumpy had made peace with losing. 2 weeks earlier, on March 8, 1967, Bumpy had dinner with Carlo Gambino to neutral territory, a restaurant in Little Italy, Rouse on East 114th Street. They talked for 4 hours. Bumpy explained the situation. Frank Lucas was building an independent operation, importing directly from Southeast Asia, undercutting Italian prices, moving 40 kilos monthly. Soon it would be 80, then 160. Exponential growth. Gambino listened, didn't interrupt when Bumpy finished. Gambino asked one question. "Can you stop him?" Bumpy shook his head. "I taught him too well." "Then he's your responsibility." Bumpy understood. If Frank succeeded, the Italians would blame Bumpy. If Frank failed, Bumpy would be collateral damage. Either way, Bumpy's era was ending. He'd ruled Harlem for 37 years, built an empire on intelligence and reputation. But intelligence couldn't compete with Frank's ruthlessness. Reputation couldn't stop blue magic from flooding the streets. Bumpy made a choice. He wouldn't fight Frank, wouldn't warn him, wouldn't protect him. Frank wanted to be king. Let him have the crown, and the target that came with it. Bumpy would step back, watch, survive, let the young man learn what power really costs. On March 15, 1967, Bumpy quietly transferred control of 3 policy banks to his wife Mamie, moved $1.2 million to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, sold 2 properties in Harlem, consolidated, prepared for retirement or war, whichever came first. His inner circle, Junie Bird, Nat Pettigrew, 6 others, noticed, asked questions. Bumpy told them the truth. "Frank's building something I can't control. Get out of his way or get destroyed. Your choice." Most of them stepped back. 2 didn't. They'd be dead within 8 months. Frank didn't tolerate competition. That night at Wells' restaurant, when Frank promised to be richer than everyone in 3 years, Bumpy believed him. More than that, Bumpy had already bet on it. He'd liquidated assets, protected his family, secured his legacy. Frank would achieve the impossible. Then the Italians would retaliate. Then the DEA would investigate. Then Frank would learn what Bumpy had always known. Empires built on heroin don't last. They burn bright. Then they burn out. Bumpy stood up from the table, dropped $3 for the coffee. "You're going to be bigger than all of us, Frank. But remember, The higher you climb, the further you fall. Frank watched him leave. Didn't respond. Didn't need to. He'd already won. At midnight, Bumpy walked out of Wells' restaurant into the Harlem night. The streets were alive. Music from Small's Paradise drifted down 7th Avenue. Car horns, laughter, sirens in the distance. Harlem breathed like a living thing. Bumpy had protected this neighborhood for decades. Now he was letting it go. Letting Frank turn it into a drug empire, because fighting Frank meant destroying Harlem himself. Better to step back. Let the fire burn. Hope something survived the ashes. Within 6 months, Frank Lucas was moving 80 kilos monthly, earning $18 million annually. His operation expanded beyond Harlem, the Bronx, Brooklyn, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit. He recruited his brothers from North Carolina, the country boys, loyal, obedient, ruthless. Frank built a network of 100 distributors, paid corrupt cops $36,000 monthly to look away, owned judges, owned evidence lockers, owned everything. The Italians finally noticed in late 1967, held meetings, demanded explanations. Bumpy played dumb, claimed Frank was operating independently, no longer his problem. The Italians didn't believe him, but couldn't prove otherwise. They tried cutting their prices. Didn't work. Tried intimidating Frank's dealers. Frank retaliated by killing 4 Italian couriers in 1 week. Bodies dropped across the city. The Italians backed off. Temporarily, by July 1968, Frank's empire was worth $52 million. He'd achieved his goal. Richer than any single Italian family. Richer than Bumpy ever was. Richer than anyone in the New York underworld, except the combined mafia itself. He'd done it in 33 months. Just under 3 years. Bumpy Johnson died on July 7, 1968. Heart attack at Wells' restaurant. 62 years old. Frank was there. Held him as he died. Bumpy's last words, "Stay clean." Frank kept that promise for 11 hours. Then built an empire that made his previous success look small. But the seeds of destruction were already planted. Ricci Roberts was watching. The DA was building a case. The Italians were planning revenge. By 1975, Frank would be in prison. His empire dismantled. His family destroyed. Everything Bumpy predicted would come true. March 22, 1967, was the night Bumpy Johnson surrendered his throne. Not in combat, not in defeat. In wisdom. He recognized a force he couldn't control. Frank Lucas represented something new in organized crime. No codes, no honor, no loyalty except to profit. Pure capitalism applied to narcotics. Bumpy's generation believed in community, in protecting Harlem while profiting from it. Frank believed in nothing except winning. That made him richer. It also made him doomed. Frank's 3-year rise proved something revolutionary. The Italian Mafia's monopoly could be broken. One man with intelligence and ruthlessness could outmaneuver 5 families with centuries of tradition. But Frank's fall proved something older. Empires built on heroin collapse, always. The money attracts attention. The violence attracts law enforcement. The betrayals multiply. By 1975, Frank was testifying against everyone he'd ever worked with. His fortune seized. His reputation destroyed. His legacy reduced to a cautionary tale. Bumpy understood this in 1967, saw the entire arc, rise and fall, glory and ruin. He stepped back not because he was weak, because he was wise. He let Frank have the crown because crowns come with targets. Real power isn't about being the richest. It's about being the last man standing. Bumpy died wealthy, respected, and free. Frank died infamous, hated, and broken. The student surpassed the teacher in money, but the teacher surpassed the student in understanding what money costs. 3 years. That's how long it took Frank Lucas to become richer than the entire Italian Mafia in Harlem. 33 months of brilliance. followed by 7 years of consequences that destroyed everything he built. If this story showed you that winning isn't the same as surviving, hit subscribe. Drop a like if you understand why Bumpy stepped aside. Comment would we owe you have fought Frank or let him burn himself out.